All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Mah Jongg live stream series. This is part 7. So previously, there were 6 other events, and all of these live stream series are on my YouTube channel, which is Mah Jongg, MAHJCON. So if you haven't been able to catch any of the or attend any of the previous ones, you could always catch up with them on the YouTube channel. And tonight, we're going to be talking about rules without penalties. Now, many of us know that the National Mah Jongg League rules can often be ambiguous, and some have even caused a bit of controversy in the Mah Jongg community. So if any of you have been following some of the groups out there, the Facebook groups and the conversations that have taken place, this has been going on for quite a long time. Now, past events that I've had have included discussions about the top 10 or top 15 most confusing Mah Jongg League rules. And I've also had an event about rules that never make it to the actual rule book, or as they call it, their guidebook. And if you're wondering why don't rules make it there, well, the last publication of Mah Jongg Made Easy, I know I'm kind of little right now, but this is the book, was published in 2020. So every year there is a bulletin that comes out in January, and any rules that they've decided to adapt or adopt, they will put in that bulletin. Now, not all the rules, the new rules, make it from the bulletin into Mah Jongg Made Easy. Even if there's a new publication that comes out, let's say next year, nobody knows when. I heard somebody say something about they heard that there's going to be a new rule book next year. But even if a new rule book comes out next year, there is no guarantee that every rule that's been mentioned in bulletins is going to make it to this new edition. As well, players are writing into the league on a regular basis. I'm one of those that does that. And there have been times where my answers to questions that are not in the rule book don't make it to the Mah Jongg Made Easy book, but some of them have actually made it into a bulletin. But again, we don't have any guarantee whether or not they're going to make it to the official rule book. So I'm going to get started, and my name is Debbie Barnett, for those of you that don't know of me. I am all about Mah Jongg events in person and online, and I love sharing my knowledge of the game with all of you out there watching from YouTube, joining me on Zoom, and I love teaching the game, and I'm very passionate about the rules. That's why I have so many of these presentations about the rules. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. All right, so this is all about rules without penalties. Now, what is a rule? You might think it's quite easy to define it. And if I put you on the spot, it'd probably be difficult to come up with an exact definition. And of course, I do my research before I do a lot of these presentations so that I could give you good quality information. But a rule is a prescribed guideline or principle that establishes standards of behaviors, actions, or procedures within a specific context or system. While formal rules pertain to laws and regulations used in social settings or games are more like informal guidelines, the purpose of rules is to establish norms, define expectations, and provide a basis for decision-making and conflict resolution. Rules can have penalties or come without penalties, where the latter has no consequences attached to them. Well, what's the importance of having rules? Rules are established to ensure good conduct and order, fairness, consistency, predictability, and they also help to maintain harmony, achieve specific objectives, and uphold the integrity of a system or organization. Now, Mah Jongg, when it pertains to rules with penalties, are established to encourage compliance and discourage undesirable behavior. Penalties can be monetary or non-monetary, such as the player's hand being called dead or paying for the entire table. Now, rules without penalties, which is what tonight is all about, under different circumstances, they serve various purposes. So they may provide guidance and direction. This would be something like social etiquette. They allow for flexibility and adaptability. This might be something like using strategy, which there's a lot of that in Mah Jongg. Rules without penalties also promotes cooperation among players. So when there are no consequences, people are more willing to help one another share information and insights. So that would be a way that rules without penalties would be quite positive. It encourages experimentation and exploration without the fear of negative consequences. So there are different professions that have programs where students are encouraged to practice skills, even if they make mistakes. Because what do we do when we make mistakes? We learn. Well, we do hope that we learn. So rules without penalties instills positive reinforcement through recognition of awards. And this might be something like in a sport where a player who demonstrates good sportsmanship might be rewarded for their good behavior. It's important to note that the use of penalties or the absence of penalties in rules depends on the specific context, the nature of activity, and the desired outcome. Different situations may warrant different approaches to enforcing rules. When it comes to Mah Jongg, many of the rules without penalties, in my opinion, lead to much room open to interpretation and potential ambiguity. When no penalty is attached to rules, it can result in disagreement, confusion, and even dispute among the players. Now, can anybody relate to that out there? Or can you all tell me that you have had absolutely no challenges with any of the Mah Jongg League rules? Well, I'm telling you, I cannot admit that in my groups because we've had plenty of arguments about the rules. Okay, now what are some of the pitfalls? So when I put this presentation together, my goal was, I always have this dream of rewriting the rule book, but I know that I support the National Mah Jongg League, so I know I wouldn't do that, but I dream about it and I think, well, gee, how would I word this or how would I change this rule? And that would be quite a big undertaking. However, I support the National Mah Jongg League, so I'm going to go ahead and make it work to the best of my ability. But when it comes to rules without penalties, I wanted to see what it would be like if I changed up the rule just a bit to make them clearer. And you'll see when we go into foster different behaviors and change up the rules a bit, maybe including some more fairness or helping with good conduct, maintaining more harmony in the game, the integrity of the game, etc. So we're going to go into our first one. And the first one I have here, the first thing I say here about the pitfalls of the rules without penalties is that they lack clarity, leading to a misunderstanding of expected behavior. So that's one of the big things that happens. The other thing that happens, and another pitfall of having a rule without penalties, is subjectivity and inconsistencies in interpretation. We see earlier, we were looking at a lot of positive things about rules without penalties. But when it comes to Mah Jongg, a little bit different. It also creates gray areas that may disrupt fairness. Disruption of gameplay due to inappropriate behavior may occur. Now, when it comes to the Mah Jongg and rules without penalties, it can be likened to a slap on the wrist. In Mah Jongg, rules without penalties are often expressed using terms such as we recommend, must be, must not be, must always be, it is courteous, may never be, it is preferable, should be, should first, should not, and no penalty. So with these words opened or a part of a rule or a sentence, it leaves it up for the individual players to make a decision how they want to handle it, basically, because, hey, you're only going to get a slap on the wrist otherwise. All right, so let's take a look. I think next we're coming. Okay, so when these terms are associated with a penalty, the rule becomes clear and concise. However, when using words like should or must without a penalty, they indicate a desirable course of action or a strategy that could be beneficial to follow, but is not mandatory or enforced. And this lack of enforcement, as I said earlier, can lead to ambiguity, inconsistencies, gray areas, and disruption of gameplay. Without clear consequences, players are left with questions like, but what if, or why not? So for the following pages, we're going to have the rule. I have the page that the rule is currently cited in Mah Jongg Made Easy. And that, again, is this book here that came out in 2020. Or if it were a letter to the league or a bulletin, it will be also cited as that. So this first rule says, we recommend, there's the key word there, we recommend that each player pick their own tiles and that the tiles be left in stacks as shown above. And there is an illustration in the book showing the stacks when you pick them above until all tiles are picked. Now, this is not a big problem if you don't leave them stacked, but there's reasoning behind a lot of the mentions or rules that are in the book. And one of the big things that comes to my mind when I think about why this rule was created is so that everybody makes sure that they have the right number of tiles. And if you don't have the right number of tiles during the Charleston, you got to throw it all in and build the walls again and start all over. Oh, what a mess. We don't want to do that. But the fact that it says we recommend leaves it open and it's not a must. So what would I do in this case? I would consider using stronger language to indicate a requirement instead of a recommendation. So if I were to rewrite this rule, my rule might be worded, each player is required to pick their own tiles and leave them in stacks of 4 as shown above until all tiles are picked. So by changing that one word from recommend to required, there is a stronger sense that you must abide by this rule. The message is stronger. And with this type of rule implemented, there's going to be clarity. Many of the rules, many of them, except for a few of them, when changed, will provide clarity. This one, fairness, I could think of some of the words, fairness, consistency, predictability, maintain harmony. All of those things will exist if this is worded differently than leaving it open to recommend. Because if someone didn't pick their group of 4 tiles and everybody's got to throw in their hand, well, you're going to have a couple people be quite annoyed because they might have the greatest tiles that have been, dealt into their hand, and now they realize they've got to throw it all in. So now what's the next rule we have? It's on Mah Jongg Made Easy, page 14. And it says to claim a discard, the player must verbalize their call by letting the other players know that they are claiming the discard. Now that's great because it does say something strong like must verbalize, right? But if there's no penalty, then with this particular rule, I feel like that may not happen. It may not be verbalized. So instead, I would state a specific consequence if a player takes the tile without verbalizing, such as needing to stop playing while others continue. So my new rule might be worded, to claim a discard, the player must verbalize their call, notify other players that they are claiming a discard, and if a player lifts a tile from the table or places the call tile on the top of their rack, they must stop playing while all the others continue. And when I use stop playing in this presentation, I am referring to it's equivalent to a dead hand, but a dead hand is when the hand that you're working on is clearly dead. It is no longer viable. It cannot be made. But if you were to have a penalty attached to this particular rule, your hand might be perfectly viable once you have to stop. So this is what and again, this rule, having a penalty attached to it, is going to create clarity, fairness, maintain harmony. All of those things would change just by changing it up a bit. Because why say must verbalize without even having any penalty if nothing's going to be enforced? All right, so the next one is also on page 14. This is a big one, and I get asked this question all the time. All right, is it courteous to leave a space between exposures? Now, I've played with many people that don't, and I've very nicely asked them if they would please separate their exposures because that's the courteous thing to do. But there's no penalty for it. So I thought about it, and instead of saying it is courteous, if you were to switch out it is courteous to you are required, it would give it a stronger sense of a need. It would enforce that rule more than just saying it's courteous because, hey, maybe there's some players I know I've played with some that aren't so courteous, don't really care. They don't want to space their tiles. Maybe they think it's going to make it harder for the player, even though it is courteous. So I think that changing it up would be that way. So my way of rewording this rule would be simply to say, you are required to leave spaces between exposures. Now, not every rule needs a strong penalty. So I didn't include a penalty for some of them because I think this one is one that doesn't require a penalty, but just make it pretty clear that it is required. Not courteous, even though it is courteous, but changing it to required is going to help a lot. And then, of course, that's going to help to maintain a lot of harmony amongst people and fairness. The next one is also on page 14, and this is similar, but this one says, when Mah Jongg is declared, tiles should be rearranged to show the correct order. Now, I believe I saw somewhere, I'm not 100% sure, and I think I wanted to just check to see if a friend of mine had, okay, no. So I think it might be mentioned somewhere. Again, I researched it and I only found it in Mah Jongg Made Easy, but it may be in a bulletin. So if it is, I'll get that put on here before I get this uploaded to YouTube. But right now in the book, it says when Mah Jongg is declared, tiles should be arranged to show the correct order. If the rule that I'm thinking of is in a bulletin, it says when Mah Jongg is declared, it should be arranged to show the correct order if a player asks you to do so. Well, for me, again, I think it would be really nice to make that mandatory. Don't leave it open for somebody having to ask you to do it. Just make it mandatory. And my new rule might read something like this. After making a Mah Jongg declaration, players are required to arrange their tiles in the specific order shown on the card. This enables the other players to verify the validity of the Mah Jongg declaration. Just that little change up. And again, that will, to me, it's good conduct. There's clarity in the rule now. It's not something where, you don't have to do it if someone doesn't ask. So, people don't even know whether they really, do they need to ask or don't they need to ask? So it doesn't leave it open up like that. And no penalty, of course, I did not even think about adding a penalty to this one. The next one I have is when exposing tiles, it is preferable to place the called tile on top of your rack before taking the tiles in your rack to make the exposure. Has now been changed to, in the 2023 bulletin, to a called tile must be placed on top of your rack. But guess what? They said must, but they did not impose a penalty on this. Now, this was, I don't know what's in the minds of the people that make up these rules or when the committee meets and they decide what rules they're going to add to the bulletin or to a new publication. But for this particular one, there was a letter to a player, and it was discussed. A little bit of controversy about this letter because the league seems to have changed this up to match a tournament rule. And there were other things mentioned, which I won't go into right now. But that's, interesting because now they have adopted a rule that is a part of tournaments. So if a called tile is placed in your rack rather than on your rack, specify that the player must stop playing while others continue. So for me, if I were to write this rule, I would change it up to, if a tile is called, it must be placed on top of a player's rack. If the tile is mistakenly placed inside the rack instead of on top, the player must stop playing while the others continue. You know, these are just things to think about. This is obviously, I'm not rewriting the rules or anything, but you'll see as we go further on, it does help you get a little bit of understanding about why there might be some confusion, and you might have questions about why there is no penalty to some of these rules. All right, so this is a 2022 bulletin. So that was 2 years ago. If a player discards before they pick, their hand should be declared dead. Discarded tile no longer available for call. Now, this should be declared is all over the book, especially when it comes to dead hand declarations. For me, if you clearly state if a player discards before picking, their hand is dead, then they must stop playing. So you take away the should with a must. There's no question asked. And if I were to write the rule, it would say, if a player discards a tile before picking their tile from the wall, they must stop playing while all other players continue. Again, you know, creates clarity, maintains fairness, and a lot of these rules will preserve the integrity of the game as well. Now, in Mah Jongg Made Easy, page 12, this is a blind path. This is what the rule there says when we're talking about the Charleston. This is a blind path and must not be looked at by the player making the blind pass. This is another one that comes up a lot because there are many players out there that have no idea why it's called a blind pass. As a matter of fact, I hear a lot of people call it, I'm going to steal a tile. Well, if you steal a tile and you don't have any idea that it's really called a blind pass and why it's called a blind pass, you might just want to look at the tile. So I think that maybe if you added a consequence for looking at a blind pass, it might make the game a little bit fairer. The new rule that I would write might say something like, if a player looks at a tile or tiles during a blind pass, they must retain the tiles or tiles. And actually, I didn't write this one. I can't take all the credit for it because this one was really hard for me to think about. So let me read it first and I'll tell you what I had come up with to begin with. If a player looks at a tile or tiles during a blind pass, they must retain the tile or tiles they observed and substitute tiles from their own rack instead. So let's talk about what consequence this could have to a player. It doesn't seem all that bad until you think about why someone's doing a blind pass. Well, they're doing it because they've got really good tiles. Now, what if they're very well set and they're playing a singles and pairs hand and they now messed up by looking at the blind pass? Well, now they've got to keep those tiles and they've got to take tiles from their hands. They cannot pass them on. Once they look at them, it's theirs. They own it. They own them. So originally, I was thinking of a way of implementing a penalty where the player would stop playing during the Charleston. And no matter how I came up with trying to figure it out, it wouldn't work because what happens if a player stops playing during the Charleston? You're left with how many players? 3, right? What don't you do, according to the National Mah Jongg League, not other variations out there, but what don't you do during a 3-player game? That's right. You do not do the Charleston. So that would really make it muddy and it wouldn't work. So this is something I came up with. I thought would be a better solution. Actually, I didn't come up with it. My husband did. So I keep saying that because I came up with the others, but I have to give him credit for thinking about this one. He's really good coming up with these ideas. All right, another one on page 14. Your 3 tiles must always be passed before you take the 3 tiles that are being passed to you. So this is pertaining to the Charleston. Now, if you clearly pick up 3 tiles and put them in your hand, and you forget, and by the time you're done, you have too many tiles. Somebody else has too little tiles. Well, yeah, it's a mess. You're gonna throw it in. But this is pertaining to, just taking the tile and not taking yours and passing them on. So that's happened at times where somebody's grabbed those tiles first instead of passing on the 3 tiles. So, and there again is no penalty. And none of these rules we're talking about have actual penalties. So I'm creating them. Alternately, it might read, if during the Charleston you pick up the 3 tiles passed to you before passing your own 3 tiles, all tiles are thrown in and the game restarted. Now, a lot of these rules, when they happen once, and you'd be really upset that you have to start all over again with the game, it would definitely make people think a little bit harder about making these types of mistakes. This doesn't happen that often, but nonetheless, it is a rule without a penalty. Oh, I thought I would include it in there. All right. Now this one shows up in Mah Jongg Made Easy on both page 14 and page 23. A joker may never be passed during the Charleston. If it is, it must be given back. Some discussion about this with my husband, with another friend of mine. We had very differences of opinion. My feeling is that if I receive a joker in the Charleston, because I am an instructor, I am going to give it back because I want to follow the rules that I teach. But I'm not really sure how many people are going to give a joker back. And in the few situations when this has occurred, later on in the game, a player would mention, I could have sworn I had another joker in my hand when my tiles were dealt in. And one time somebody else says, I think you passed me a joker, but now I don't remember. So it went something like that. I couldn't believe they even admitted it. But so my feeling is, my solution to this one would be eliminate the rule altogether. Well, this could have some positives. So allow jokers to be passed during the Charleston. It might be a benefit to both the giving and receiving players. All right, so a player who is aiming for a singles and pairs hand may face the dilemma of having to break up a good hand if they are unable to pass a joker. So if you allow jokers to be passed in the Charleston, they don't have to break their hand up, and someone's going to be the lucky recipient of a joker. That just makes it a little bit more interesting, I think. Just the thought I had. Again, jokers may never be passed during the Charleston. There's no penalty attached. We won't even ever know, in most cases, is my feeling, whether or not they get passed. So without having clear-cut rules, you just don't know. So it would be a great way to implement predictability, pretty much, if you were to create this type of rule. On page 19 of Mah Jongg Made Easy, it states if the miscalled tile is called, causing an invalid exposure, the calling player's hand is now dead, and there is no penalty to the discarder of the incorrectly named tile. Now, I agree this game is about watching and listening, not just listening, but also watching. But I thought, to spice this one up a bit, maybe it could be changed up to including a penalty. to the calling player's hand. In addition to the discarder of the misnamed tile, in addition to the calling player's hand. So maybe the rule would read something like, if a misnamed tile is called resulting in an invalid exposure, the calling player's hand is now dead. Additionally, the player who incorrectly named the tile is responsible for paying for the table. I know that one sounds a little bit strong, but I thought it was kind of interesting to kind of come up with it to see what it would look like and sound like. All right, Mah Jongg Made Easy, page 19. A player should not declare their own hand dead. It's up to other players to declare a hand dead. This one is a big one for me. And if I had to maybe pick my top 5 rules that I'd love to see them change up, this might be one of those that I would like to see changed up. There's strategy both ways. Whether you were to call your own hand dead or another player calls you dead, whether you do it or don't, there is strategy involved. So, state a player can declare their own hand dead with certain conditions applying, but not make it mandatory. Other players can also declare a hand dead. So when I say put a condition on it, I would write the rule like this. A player has the option to declare their own hand dead if the exposed tiles indicate that there is no possibility of forming a winning hand, or if the tiles required to complete a single grouping or pair suggest that the hand cannot be achieved. So we don't want somebody to just call their hand dead because they have lousy tiles and just say, I'm calling my hand dead. So this is why we came up with this type of wording here. But I really think a player should not declare their own hand dead. But where's the penalty? There is no penalty. You just get a slap on the wrist. Yes, you're not supposed to call your own hand dead. Somebody else is supposed to call your hand dead. So technically, if you do call your hand dead, the others have a right to ignore it or call your hand dead. I mean, let's face it. What if a player is sitting with a tile in their hand and there is a joker in an exposure and they want to grab the joker? I had a whole conversation about somebody about that, and they were saying, well, it's not ethical, but it's not ethical, but it's perfectly fine. It's a strategic move to do that. Now, you could technically wait, exchange a joker in someone's exposure, and then next time around, call their hand dead. Oh, it just doesn't seem right to me at all. But anyway, this gives this gives a whole lot more flexibility to the whole dead hand situation. All right, we don't have too many more. Page 23, Mah Jongg Made Easy. It is recommended that a player never touch another player's tiles. Ooh, this one goes around a lot of buzz about this one. The player should first announce that a joker exchange is to be made. So this is all about joker exchanges. The replacement tile should be handed to the player whose rack contains the joker, and that player makes the exchange and hands the joker to the other player. This, in tournaments, the rule is you do a hand-to-hand exchange, because if you forget to announce, and actually it happened today. I was in a game. It happened today. A player put a tile down on the table and said 7, and then lifted it back up and said, oh, I want your joker. And everybody said, no, can't do. And so that is one of the reasons to get into good form with this hand-to-hand exchange. So what's the key word here? It is recommended, right? Recommended. Again, it's not clear. It's recommended. Instead, Specify the steps of announcing intent and performing a hand-to-hand exchange, emphasizing that missing these steps forfeits the opportunity. So my new rule might say something like, when conducting a joker exchange, a player must first announce their intention to exchange and then perform a hand-to-hand exchange. If either of these two steps is missed, the player forfeits the opportunity for the joker. This is another one that I think I would definitely put in my top 5 if I had the choice to make those changes happen. Of course, this rule, good conduct for sure. I mean, I see people dive across the table and grab jokers from people. Not really cool as far as I'm concerned. All right, on page 30, we have a player whose hand has been declared dead must remain silent for the remainder of that hand. Now, I don't see this happening often, but again, I put it in because it is one of those rules that has no consequences. We've got a must, but we have no consequences. I did have this go on a couple of times during my years playing Mah Jongg. And again, what do you do? Slap the person on the hand, but there's no consequence for it. So if there were, consider adding a penalty such as if a player whose hand has been declared dead discusses any aspect of the game, they must pay for the table. Boy, they won't do it again, will they? A new rule can state if a player, after having their hand declared dead or has stopped playing, engages in any discussion regarding the game with other players, the player at fault must pay for the table. Some of these might sound strict, but I think that having penalties attached to more of the rules will, create a lot of harmony and fairness, and it's still and it will maintain the integrity of the game. I just think that it would help quite a bit with having these things just be open without having anything attached to them. And then if you make a mistake and there's a penalty, you're going to be apt to be a lot more careful next time around. Well, at least that's what I think. All right, page 30, we suggest that a player never throw a dangerous or obviously hot tile at any time or into a third or fourth exposure. The offensive play, and what's the operative word here? Recommended. It's recommended, okay? That means it's your choice whether you want to play defensively or not. Every pick and discard should be a challenge to the very last tile on the wall. This is part of the fun. Well, you leave it open. That means that if I decide to throw a hot tile in the last 8 tiles left in the wall and I give somebody else Mah Jongg, oh, well, that's my prerogative. That's the way it is right now. I tell people that, we all want to win, but there is a time and a place to break up your hand. That's really the truth of the matter when it comes to strategy. And if you do play for money and you throw a tile, people seem to forget you're not the only one paying for it, right? Everybody else is paying for it. Some of the payouts are quite big, depending on the hand you win. So in this particular case, I would consider adding a penalty if a player whose hand, but use something, a penalty such as a hot wall table rule to discourage throwing obviously tiles and maintaining fairness. So my rule would say something like, if during the last 12 tiles of the game, I don't know, I just came up with that number, a player throws an obviously hot tile into a third or fourth exposure, the player is responsible for paying for the table. In this context, a hot tile refers to a tile for which the player cannot account for 3 identical tiles being in their hand, in an exposure, or on the table. I think this one would be a great addition as well. This would probably again be in my top 5 if I had to make a choice about being able to implement rules. Of course, this rule definitely would keep a lot of harmony, because man, I've seen nasty things said when people have thrown hot tiles. Why did you do that? You knew what she needed. Okay, right now, the way the rule reads, you're not supposed to say anything, because the league only recommends you consider not doing it, and they don't require it, and there's no penalty. So if you want to have a little bit more harmony in the game, if this were implemented, and by the way, a lot of these things, there have been table rules added to games throughout the entire time since the National Mah Jongg League formed in 1937 and started the game. I mean, I have seen the transition of some table rules that have come and gone, and you never know. You might want to implement one of these crazy rules that I've come up with and added a penalty to. But at least, it would create, again, harmony, fairness, and you would pretty much know that during the end of the game, somebody's not going to throw an obviously hot tile. So that would be kind of a fun one, I think. All right, so in conclusion, although it is improbable that the league will alter their position on these rules, gaining an understanding of the potential difficulties associated with rules without penalties can offer valuable insights, taking into account factors such as clarity, consistency, and fairness in the rules can significantly enhance the overall experience of playing a mahjong. And I'm going to open it up if anybody has any questions, they have anything they want to say. But I do want to say that I have a ton of educational material on the MahJongg YouTube channel. So please feel free to check it out. I have the new 14-lesson video series to learn mahjong. A lot of teachers have been emailing me and telling me that after they do their lessons, they are sending the link to their students to watch the video series. So this could be a great add-on to a student's learning curve, because there's a great amount of learning curve here. If anybody has any questions, and hi Linda, she joined earlier on YouTube and I didn't see the hi, but hello there, and everybody else who's watching. If anybody has anything, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to get out of this one. And I do want to thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope you found this interesting, because I had a lot of fun creating this presentation, and I'm going to stop sharing right now. If anybody has any questions or has any thoughts about any of the rules without penalties and how you feel about them, please let me know. You can, since we're not a huge crowd, feel free to unmute and we can have a conversation about it. This is all just my opinion and how I think about these rules that come without penalties. There are so many additional rules that need clarifying, and Marcy's going to ask a question or make a comment. But yeah, there's so many rules that need clarifying. This is just one small segment of them. Again, I'm quite passionate about the rules and stuff. So Marcy. Yes.
Trying to teach and convince people of defensive play, especially towards on the last wall,
Mhm.
It's just, I tear my hair out, and I say, you do understand that we all are paying, if I want a wall game, you got to go for, I always teach, if you're not going to win, go for, if you're not going to win, go for a wall game. And it just doesn't happen. People
Mhm.
will throw a tile at a 3 exposure. And I'm just going, I don't have an answer for that, but I like what you wrote.
And I thank you, Marcy. And I think that that's why table rules have been created to
Yeah.
spice up the game and make it more challenging. I actually would find it quite fun to take maybe one of these rules that I've come up with and say, hey, let's play for, or maybe a handful of them or something. Let's play with these new rules and see what happens. I think rules are needed in
Oh,
games like Mah Jongg, strategic games like Mah Jongg. If you read, I've only read one canasta book. I've read quite a bit about chess rules. I've read a bit about bridge rules. I am not good at bridge or chess by any means. Canasta a little bit more, but you go through the book and you don't see, you should, it's recommended, you don't see any of that. It's the rules. They are the rules. Here it is, right? Spelled out clearly. But with Mahjong, we have a lot of unclear rules. And, I understand the league to a point, and they say they want to have, it also be a friendly social game. But you know what? You've got a lot of mahjong and error scenarios and dead hands, and this one does this and this one does. I mean, why not just make it consistent throughout? What's wrong with rules? Right? So, all right, let me look and see in here. Darren said, great presentation. Wish League would make clarifications. Oh, Darren, I agree with you 100%, but we know that's never going to happen. Pam says, wondering what are your views on East distributing tiles from the wall versus players taking their own? Okay, so that's a great question, Pam. And I do actually have an opinion, because if I were to change that rule up, I would have there be a dealer in Mahjong, just like in every other game. One dealer. Because right now you have, even though the book says everybody deals out their own tiles, some groups have East deal out the tiles, and other people, want to take their own tiles. But having one person be responsible to deal the tiles out, I think would prevent somebody from having the wrong number of tiles, number one, too. Although if you do that groupings of 4, like you're supposed to do, that's going to help as well. But that's a great question. Yeah, I would do away entirely with everybody taking their own tiles. Why in Mahjong do we not have a dealer? In all other games we do, right? Anybody ever think about that? Probably so, yeah. Okay, Darren says, do you know why the National Mahjong League do not want to add more penalties? Well, I have actually, I speak to them more than I want to admit that I speak to them about trying to get clarity to rules, and then following it up with a letter, which I don't always do, and I really need to. Because if you call the league 3 days in a row and you speak to 3 different people, you're going to get 3 different answers. But if you get it in writing, at least you know it's in writing, and until somebody tells you, rip that letter up, we've changed the rule. I had that happen once, by the way. But they don't want to make it where this is what they say. To me, honestly, I don't know if I fall for the reasoning that much. They say they don't want to make it so it's so strict. and not a fun, enjoyable social game. Okay, well, I don't know. I'm not so sure I believe in that. I believe that. What do you guys think? I mean, do you have any ideas of why they would have so many things just left open to interpretation? And, look at all of if you follow some of these Facebook groups, it is a mind-boggling because the rules are all over the place. And yes, this tonight is about rules without penalties, but, going into just the rules in general, which I've done in these confusing rules, you've got the same rule mentioned sometimes in 3 different places in the book. 3 different places. Why can't they all be in one place? Right? So that's just my feeling. Now, Donna says they don't want to impose so many penalties because they don't want people to be punished so much. It's a friendly game, and she did an upside down smiley face. Okay. Yeah, I know. Donna and I have spoken about rules quite a bit. And yes, I know that whole thing about it's a friendly game. All righty. It is a friendly game. Look, this is a strategic competitive game. There's no way to get around it. 100% a strategic competitive game. If you're going to play a game that has rules in it and you're going to be playing for money, for those that do, or for points if you don't play for money, you need to have rules. Clear and concise rules. That's my thought on that. The way Debbie has reworded many of these is friendly, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, I didn't say that I'm going to take your firstborn away or anything like that, but yeah. But it was a fun exercise for me to do, and just like sometimes I dream about being able to write a whole brand new National Mah Jongg League rule book. Like they call me up and they say, "Hey, Debbie, I'd like to hire you. Would you rewrite the book?" I would be all over it. I swear. Yeah, and Donna said, I'm just saying what I've been told by the National Mah Jongg League, and I agree with you. I have been told the same thing on the phone. We want it to be a friendly game. Well, if it's going to be a friendly game, then don't ever call anybody's hand dead. Right? I've had people that are newer players say that they're embarrassed to call a person's hand dead. And they've said to me, isn't it rude? That's very rude. Right? So we could think of it. We could think of it all, all different ways and from all different perspectives. Marcy said, I want to ban the word friendly game from Mahjong. I feel it is an excuse for bending rules. I agree with you. Some groups don't even want you to use that word. What is it? It's either a friendly game or an unfriendly game, right? I don't like that. Yeah. Yeah, why say friendly? It's a Mahjong game, man, and we're competing. Why are we playing? I mean, it is such a great, okay, so as an example, today, I rarely play socially because I work more than I do play, but I got invited to fill in on a game today. And they were so great. They're the exact kind of people I want to play with. We did some chit-chatting. We made sure we did stay on track because, we get a little confused as we get a little bit older. I'm speaking for myself here. But we had social interaction. We had some laughs, but man, we followed the rules. And they have some crazy table rules. So I'm telling you, it was big. The payout stuff, the hot wall rule, all kinds of fun things. Rolling doubles, everybody gets to pick one number weekly in their group. So that if that's rolled on the dice, that's paid double. Oh, they had a bunch of fun things that they did. But that's the kind of game I want to play in. I want to play in a game where people follow the rules. That's just I think it's important. Otherwise, don't have any. All right, let's see. Anybody, you're welcome. Michelle, anybody on YouTube have any questions? No. Okay, perfect. All right, any more last minute questions before we close this out? For any of you that are watching, if you would like a PDF of this presentation, just send me an email and ask me for it. I'll be glad to share it with you. I am happy to share anything that I have with anybody. And it would be kind of fun, I think, to, like I said, maybe even play some games if you have any friends that are willing to add any of the rules in. So how many of you, before we sign off, how many of you, put it in the chat, experience people looking at a blind pass? And then while we're on the blind pass, how many people have you heard call it, I want to steal? And does anybody know where they got the word steal from? Because I have no idea. It's not written anywhere, as far as I know, in a bulletin, in the rule book. So several people have seen people look, okay. Darren says, my gal pal from New York always looks at blind pass tiles. She says she cannot help herself. Well, if my rule is implemented, she probably won't be doing that too long. Right, Darren? Oh, wow. And how many of you do hand-to-hand exchanges when you do Joker exchanges? Just curious. Oh, you said, so, okay, always hand-to-hand for you, Marcy. That's great. It just clarify, when you said the cheating part, do you mean with the blind pass? Yes, okay. Yeah, I mean, does everybody know? Okay, Phyllis says she definitely does a hand-to-hand. That is great. I mean, I'm telling you, I think it's the best thing in the world to do. If somebody takes their tile and they don't announce it, and they just put it down on the table, but they move it all the way over in front of the player, would you let that go as being an indicate? No verbalization. So they don't say, your Joker, please. They take the tile and they slide it right over in front of the player that they want the Joker from. Right? So, in a tournament, 100%, it's going to be a discard. And according to the way the rule reads, you should verbalize it. But what's the penalty? There is no penalty. That's why it's in this presentation. Yeah, so hand-to-hand, get in good form, and then you'll never have to worry about it when, you decide to try out your first tournament. And so let's see. Michelle says, I have heard people say steal. Hi, Gloria. Thanks for joining in. Does anybody know where the term steal came from? It's got such a negative context, at least for me it does, but yeah, so all right, let's see. Phyllis says, I try to get them not to put the Joker down on the table, but it does not always work. Oh, you mean the tile down that you're handing to them? I'm assuming you mean not to put the tile down on the table, or because if they put the Joker down after, it's not going to make much of a difference. Although, again, just getting good form, that's almost like, in a way, it's rude for me, it seems rude, maybe not intentionally rude, but if I hand somebody a joker and say, may I have your joker, please? Because I always ask nicely. I have a lot of people just, they go joker, just like that. But I always say nicely. So if they didn't hand the joker back to me and instead put it on the table, I kind of sometimes feel weird. People do that. And I don't know if it's like they don't want to touch, they like OCD a little. They don't want to touch, they don't want to take a chance and touch my hand, but I don't think so. Those Mah Jongg tiles are not clean. I'm just saying, some of them are not clean at all. Even if they look clean, oh, no. All right, all right, no more questions on YouTube, no more questions on Zoom. And again, it was wonderful spending the evening with you. I always enjoy it. Let's see, when the next event is my regular Wednesday night live stream, which is skill building. So I'm looking forward to that. And then I have Expert Connect every 2 weeks. So I'll tell you who's coming up. Oh, my next guest is Gladys Grad, the creator of Siamese Mah Jongg. So Gladys will be with us at the next Expert Connect. That should be fun. Oh yeah. I have to be careful and make sure, because Gladys has so much knowledge about so much, and she's done so much with the Mah Jongg world. So keeping it to 45 minutes and leaving time for Q&A is going to be a little challenging. I know, because she's just a plethora of information and her businesses and everything she does. She's so interesting. That's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so everybody, be safe. May the jokers come your way. Play a lot of Mah Jongg. Play by the rules. Yeah, enjoy, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me tonight. Bye. See you soon, everyone.